Hi, it's Jason from Fraser Valley Rose Farm. I'm back with my month-by-month series of rose care videos. This one for the month of April. It's spring. Beautiful. In this video, I'm going to cover all the basics of rose care, all the pests and feeding and watering. And if you're coming to me for the first time this season, you may wonder, did you miss the pruning video? Well, not really. I will be covering some pruning in this video, but I went into it in more depth because in the timing in my climate, I did that in February. So I'll link the February video down below if you want to review my step-by-step instructions on pruning reblooming roses. And I'll link March in case you want a refresher on how to prune your once blooming species and old garden roses. All right, let's get to today's video. Moving on to the video section on main activities for April, what I'm doing is I'm giving my roses a second cup of alfalfa fertilizer at the base of the plants. The first cup came when I did my first pruning about 6 to 8 weeks ago, so the timing checks out. I've taken a cup like this, I put a scoop around the base of the plant, scratch it into the soil and give it some water to help it to start breaking down. And of course you can see that the plants have put on a nice set of fresh growth since the time that I fed them the first time. So 6 to 8 weeks later, this is a good time to give them their second cup. I'm going to give you a close-up now of one of the leaves here, some of the foliage, and I'm going to show you that it has a distinct yellowish or golden tinge to it this early in the season. I beg you not to panic. This is the time of year that a lot of people go out and they search this symptom and they end up buying either Epsom salts or an iron product to top up those nutrients in their soil. The fact is that cool soil and early growth can bring on those yellow tones very naturally. You are far better to go with the slow and steady approach of something like alfalfa that is never going to overwhelm your soil with one or another nutrients. It gives you a fairly balanced profile of nutrients and just is not going to burn the roots of your plants. Now, before I move on entirely from spring pruning, I have a question to answer. It has to do with this rose here that got away from me. Obviously, this is tall and it's in fresh growth. We're all told that you should do your spring pruning optimally in late winter before it pushes a bunch of energy into its fresh new growth. I would love to say that I left this one as a demonstration for you, but fact is it just got away from me and now I'm left with a decision. Now I can go ahead and let it bloom out completely as it is and just have that first flush of blooms and then do my pruning after that. And that's appealing at this point because there's lots of fresh growth on this. This is going to go into flower a lot quicker. Or the other thing I have to consider is that, of course, if it blooms, some of those blooms are going to be way up here, way at the top of the plant where I'm not going to enjoy them. I'd rather have them, well, let's say nose level, chest level, that kind of thing. So I think what I will do with this one here is give it a quick trim now. That will delay its flowering, but I think I'll be more satisfied with the results. Let me show you a different example where I would make the opposite decision. So this rose also got missed during my spring pruning. The difference is that it's not nearly so tall, and also that this is Abraham Darby, a David Austin shrub rose that tends to put on its best display a bit on the large size. So looking at all this entire thing, the shape is not unmanageable. I may just nip off some of the spent blooms from last year, the deadheading and that kind of thing, and the dead ends. But basically I'm going to leave it at this shape and size, let it bloom out, and I will deal with it after the first flush of blooms, usually in late June. On to the section now about fertilizer and soil, and I know I mentioned putting on some alfalfa, but just because alfalfa, manure, and compost are my favorite way of feeding my roses doesn't mean they're the only way of feeding roses. So I'll put a quick review of what I recommend in terms of chemical fertilizers. This is a controlled release fertilizer. I think the numbers on it are something like 15, 9, 12. A little bit higher in nitrogen, a little bit lower in phosphorus because the roses don't need that much phosphorus, a little bit higher in potassium and micronutrients to help with all of the balance in your soil or your potting soil. Here's another one. This is a liquid feed fertilizer, 26-8-16. Again, higher nitrogen, lower phosphorus because the roses need less phosphorus and it can tend to build up in your soil or potting soil. And then it has a higher level of potassium, again, with a good amount of micronutrients. So that's basically it. I'm not telling you exactly which brand or which product to choose. I'm just saying these are the basics of it. I have a whole other video on how to feed your roses, which I will link right here, that goes into depth on why I chose the balance that I did. did. But the point being that in a container, as you're feeding plants that way, it might be easier actually to maintain with a controlled release or a slow release fertilizer or a liquid feed than it is out in the landscape, where I think actually the organic matter in the alfalfa, the compost, the manure is of greater benefit, long-term benefit in building your soil. Okay, so I'm going to talk about watering, and I know it feels weird to me when the landscape is this green and it's obviously got lots of soil moisture that I'm talking about watering, but I want to bring your attention to the fact that look at all this lush new growth that's showing up on your roses. And as it leafs out like that, its watering demands go way up. The first week that you don't get a solid watering and your soil moisture goes down, that's the time when you want to be checking here, and that's going to vary by climate. Absolutely. In my climate here, it usually doesn't happen in April at all, or even in May to some degree here on Nikoman Island. But as soon as I hit June and have a dry week, then I'm watching for the signs of drought stress on the plants. I'm digging around little test holes to see how much moisture there is in the soil. And wherever you are, that first week without rain, that's when you're going to be looking for it. So here inside the greenhouse, lots of lush new growth, and actually look at that. We have a few flowers showing up. That's owing to the warmer conditions inside the greenhouse and the protection they had over the winter. Some things are showing up soon, but hey, have a look at that red stem in the center of the screen here. What else you're going to see is aphids. I'll get you a close-up of that as well. But in my climate, in my greenhouses, April equals aphids. And some people ask the question, well, what did I do wrong? How did I get aphids? Or did I do something bad to my plants? No, they just show up. And I did a video on aphids that basically they rain in from the air currents and they propagate themselves, like they clone themselves on your plants. So there's really nothing you're doing wrong. It just happens to be the time of year where their population booms. So much more constructive than focusing on what went wrong is focusing on what you can do right. And the aphids are very good at reproducing early in the season, but all the insect populations are coming up. And what you can do is ensure that there's diversity in your garden. So having lots and lots of other plants in your garden, other perennials, other shrubs coming into bloom and joining up with your roses means that you're going to balance out those populations of aphids. April is aphids, but May is no longer a problem in my climate. They do flush back and forth throughout the season, but by the time I'm hitting the midsummer, I'm dealing more with thrips and with spider mites than with aphids. So that's the pest of the month, and the way to deal with it is biodiversity, or if you have a really acute matter of aphids on the tips of your plants, that's where they show up, right on the flowering tips, the growing tips of the plants, and it's troubling you and you're concerned it's harming the plant, just rinse them off with a sharp spray of water or insecticidal soap. And while I make that pitch for garden diversity, it is in fact the reason why we focus so much on perennials as the companion plants for our roses here, because having so many different kinds of plants means that you're bound to have things more in flower, supporting those beneficial insect populations through more of the season. So I'm going to give over the section today on talking about propagation, is to say that you can go out into your garden right now. If you have a bunch of perennials, it is a good time to split those and divide those and transplant them into areas with your roses so they have companions and you improve the biodiversity in your garden. I did a video on that just recently and I'll post the link to that now. Okay, so I like to finish out these videos with a plant spotlight, and why not spotlight one that's in bloom right now? This is a rose called Doornbos. I'll show you some pictures from it in the landscape. The fact that it is in bloom so early here in the pot also echoes what it's going to do in the landscape. It will probably be in full bloom out in the landscape by the month of May, along with a lot of the other Scots roses, which are super tough, reliable plants that just happen to have a very, very early bloom period. All right, that's it for the video on April. If you have any questions, please drop them down into the comments below the video and I'll see what I can do to help.